Now, you mentioned younger individuals, and now I'm not even talking about kratom. I'm curious about drug use, specifically different types of steroids, because I've heard Derek talk about how, like, use the example of tren and how it can affect a young developing brain, a guy that's using tren at 17 years old, how it can permanently affect their brain. But a lot of young kids are starting to just hop on steroids because the information is out there and they have the ability to purchase that stuff. What do they need to be being careful about, not just for their body and their hormones, because there's a lot of stuff going on there, but their brain specifically?
So just before I mention that, can I mention also, when we're talking about liver toxicity from kratom, this is not unique to kratom. There are a lot of like herbal formulations. For example, ashwagandha is notorious for causing liver failures. It does this frequently in the literature. You'd be surprised. And for example, kava, which is a GABAergic, supplement as well, similar to kratom. Kava is way more toxic than kratom. So I just want to mention it's not, unique to kratom. And then about so the studies, there are studies on humans. I've reviewed these studies of how androgens, PED supplementation with androgens affect brain chemistry. The most interesting element of what you can see from the studies is in young rodent studies, juvenile rodents. There's an interesting difference. If you give an adult rodent, for example, the study was actually on nandrolone, if I remember correctly, which is DECA or NPP. If you give an adult rodent nandrolone, they experience a reduction in serotonergic signaling acutely in the brain. Remember, serotonin modulates the neurogenesis. That's the target of LSD and psilocybin. And they experience more hostility acutely. But when you take out the drug, the hostility decreases and they return back to normal function. If you give it to a juvenile rodent, a male rodent, and you take out the drug, they remain hostile in adulthood and have reduced serotonin signaling in adulthood. So there may be permanent effects from using androgens too young in terms of the brain chemistry. But particularly, it seems like, I don't know if you ever heard of before, if you use testosterone with an AI in studies, it is neurotoxic at high doses. NPP, for example, or nandrolone is always neurotoxic. But if you use testosterone at high doses, it becomes neurotoxic. Well, when you use an AI. What does the AI do? The AI stops testosterone from increasing estradiol, and estradiol increases serotonergic signaling in the brain, thereby protecting brain cells from death through the neurogenesis. So when you use these drugs, the acute effect is you're harming the serotonin system. And that's a lot of how you develop the hostility, the lack of feeling of well-being, contentment, not from all PEDs, but from some of them. Now, tren is one of the most psychiatrically effective PEDs. I mean, that is the worst one. Really, I don't even know. Nobody could take halotestin for 3 months straight. So there's really nothing you can compare tren to in terms of that effect. I believe that if somebody takes tren at a young age, they'll end up with symptoms of, like, if they do it for 6 months, symptoms of like PTSD. Not everybody responds the same way, of course. Some people have a higher sympathetic nervous drive naturally. They're on edge naturally. And those people are the ones who are going to have the most effects from it. But there's so many other choices that don't have psychiatric effects. Like Primobolan has no psychiatric effects. Equipoise does. Primo and Equipoise both potently increase hematopoiesis. So they're comparable. But Primo has no psychiatric effects. Test generally doesn't do these things to people, especially if they let it aromatize. Nandrolone, I've noticed in my experience, a lot of people who use a lot of DECA have bizarre personalities later in life. Like, they just get weird. It's very interesting because DECA signals a lot in the progesterone receptors from what we can tell, and it doesn't aromatize. So they have that low estrogen, weirdly high progesterone for a man, and they have different kinds of... I've just noticed this. A lot of people use DECA. So they're not all made equal. Anavar has barely any psychiatric effects, maybe a little irritability. It's not very liver toxic. So there are choices people can make,
You've been in a powerlifting gym before, obviously training with Scott Mendelson. I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've seen that firsthand where dudes that are normally pretty calm are now getting into a fist fight about the lift off they got or something like that. And, it's not always just necessarily the testosterone. It's a lot of different hormones flying around as some of these people would prepare for competitions.
Exactly. Well, it's a very unique thing in the powerlifting gym. People are very excitable there. And there's a lot of ego and a lot of, I don't know if this is true for Westside Barbell, but here at least there's a lot of ego and stuff like that. But the weird thing is when you're talking to someone and they're anxious when they're talking to you, they're dodging, moving around, they're not comfortable in their seat. You can see the person's not content. You can only imagine, how are they sleeping? How is this affecting them long term? It causes damage to the psyche.
Is it crystal meth or is it DECA? Hard to tell.
Tren acts like that sometimes. Yeah, you could think the guy's on meth sometimes, depending on the person. Yeah, that's true.
Then, so also young kids like 18, 19, 20, 21, and TRT. As far as testosterone, you said there are barely any effects on the brain, but I don't know. I don't know much about that stuff, but I feel like there's a reason to be careful, like especially you're not done developing. So what would your advice be there in just terms of making sure they're careful?
Well, there's a lot of reasons to be careful about that. So, for example, one reason to be careful when these young kids want to hop on TRT, one reason is this. If you have a higher androgen level, irrespective of whether you've done damage to your brain or your gonads or anything, your sex drive will adapt to that level. And when you lower your androgen level, even if your balls work perfectly fine and you have a good test level, you're not at 3,000, now you're at 1,000. You're going to have lower sex drive. You're going to have lower energy. You adapt to that. You acclimate to it, and it never is quite the same after. So when someone experiences that crazy, it's not going to come from TRT maybe, but when you get on a gram of testosterone, it's never quite the same after. So one guide is this. If somebody does want to use performance enhancing drugs, always use the minimal amount. Don't think of it in terms of cycles. I got to get the most out of this cycle and then get out of it. Use the minimal amount that you get results from, and only raise it when you need to. And then keep track of your health as you do. So you never get to 2 grams of testosterone and get this crazy sex drive. Then you get off it and it takes you a year and a half to have the sex drive back. So in a young man, this could cause psychological issues. He could get worried, doubt himself, have confidence issues. The second thing I want to mention is this. A lot of people use TRT when their balls work, which doesn't make any sense. So why does it make sense? When your balls produce testosterone, they also produce progesterone, and they also aromatize the testosterone, and 5-alpha reduce the testosterone. There's a lot of complex mechanisms that happen when you produce testosterone locally. When you inject it into your muscle, it is metabolized completely differently. And so, for example, it affects sex drive less per the nanograms per deciliter testosterone you have. If it's injected, you'll have less sex drive. So it works a little bit differently. It's less 5-alpha reduced, less aromatized, and so on. The other thing becomes this. Well, how do you know if your balls work? Well, if you go to you do a blood test, you check your testosterone level, and then you check your luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. If your luteinizing hormone is, say, 5 or 6, well, hey, if my brain just signaled more, if my brain said 7 or 8 luteinizing hormone to my balls, I would produce more tests. So why get on testosterone, strangle my balls, suffocate them? They can't produce anything because they have all these negative indicators to my brain, when I could have just taken HCG and acclimated the dose. See, okay, I've used 1,000 units of HCG every other day, and I have the same test as I used to. Well, now I know my baseline replacement dose for LH, and I can raise it a bit higher for a short time period if I need higher tests for resilience or whatever. And the difference here is when I take the HCG out, all I got to do is block estrogen in the brain, and my brain will restart signaling luteinizing hormone much easier than if I went on TRT at 18 and 3 years later I decide I want to go off it. Well, my balls literally have necrosis of tissue, dead tissue. That's what happens. Yeah, there are post-mortem studies of bodybuilders. I found an interesting study showing fibrosis in their testicles. Fibrosis happens after you get necrosis, scar tissue develops. So you're losing the integrity of your balls when you're 18 years old. Why do that? So if you're going to do anything, the first step I would always think is maybe HCG, FSH, and then maybe I could use something in addition to it. It may not be TRT. If I'm trying to gain muscle, it may be just Anavar 3 days a week. Well, now you could use Anavar because you're replacing your brain's luteinizing hormone, so your balls are always going to work. You have a test base. So you don't have to go and do a huge cycle. You could just do 3 Anavars a week and see, do I gain from that? It's a much easier way, like instead of jumping in a pool, just putting your feet in, going slowly.
Boys and girls, make sure you prescribe to utilizing like a fit chick who's going to prep for a contest type of protocol rather than like a full-on bodybuilder.
Exactly.
I really liked your explanation, especially because it got to be complex, and it's like that's another reason why people that are young just probably shouldn't fuck with it, because once you start to pump testosterone through your body, there's a lot of other things you got to think about.
Yeah, genuinely, I never had potential in athletics as being a top athlete. But if I had potential, I may have done it differently. But keep this in mind, just for the audience to realize, any young people listening. I started reading about steroids when I was 15. I only used them at 23. And I knew anything like a normal bodybuilder knew about them, but I just didn't know enough. And the more you know, I just recently answered a question on my channel. Someone was asking, like, should I use ezetimibe, that cholesterol medication, for controlling my heart rate? And I was like, brother, if you have made that big of a mistake, this is a cholesterol medication, you're talking about your heart rate, don't use any of them. Go study. You got to go. And then we have, thankfully, because of YouTube now, we have videos and stuff where people can learn. Don't use something if you're not completely comfortable with the mechanisms that it's manipulating in your body. Even if a doctor is comfortable, he may not know what he's doing really, and you may get yourself in a bad position.
It's really cool that you're mentioning all this, because again, like it's this stuff can be done safely, but like 99% of people don't know an eighth, or actually just even 10% of what you're talking about, and they're blasting stuff at 20, 21, 22 years old, and then they're putting that information out for people on the internet to say, hey, do what I'm doing, it works. It's crazy.
I'll tell you, brother, there was actually a history behind this. I've tried to document this on my channel. There was a guy called GH15. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him. There was an account online called GH15. In 2000, he was on the Get Big forums. In 2006 to 2012, he popularized this trend cycle thing. That's where it came from. It wasn't Z's. I don't know if you guys have heard of Z's too. Z's was influenced also by the GH15 thing, but it was that GH15 guy. He was going around saying that pro bodybuilders are using 300 milligrams of tren a day. They use at least a gram of equipoise, at least a gram of deca. They used it. So there was this huge, and this spurred in those years this idea of using mega cycles. And then in 2015, Rich Piana and my friend Boston Lloyd came out and popularized it even more on YouTube. There was a source behind all this mega dosing stuff. It really all started with that GH15 guy, who personally I've determined it seems to be Nasser Sambati started the account and then left it to his friends after he died, and they tried to start selling drugs from Eastern Europe. So a lot of it was misinformation, and that's where a lot of people started thinking, hey, if I use a crazy amount of drugs, I might mutate. I'll change in a month. And what they don't know is when they use that amount of drugs, that amount will never work the same for you again. So if you started with 3 grams and you use 500 milligrams your next cycle, you're not going to develop anything. And you just burned that out. Even if your receptors upregulate, it's been a little bit, it's going to take years to upregulate back to what it was. And if you're a young guy, you may be doing damage to your psyche, things that you might not recover from easily.
Leo, what's it like adjusting to having a baby?
Oh wow! It's I have a sleep deficit. I look a little bit funny because I couldn't sleep well. It's wonderful, Mark. I can't tell you. I mean, obviously you know the feeling, but right now I've started to interact with my daughter's a month old now. She's gonna be a month old in a couple of days. So now there are times when she's not crying or drinking, so I can sit and like chat with her. Obviously doesn't know what I'm saying, but it's a lovely thing. It's lovely to have a wife I love and a daughter. It makes me now I realize why soldiers or like assassins shouldn't have families, because you care so much about the damn family. It just overwhelms your day. I spend all my day thinking about them.
Yeah, I have a 7-month-old, and one thing that I actually did want to bring up, and this is actually perfect for it. I've been wrestling with this issue. I think I'll call it an issue, but these things, caffeine, as you know right now, some nights you're not going to get much sleep, and it's gotten a lot better. So I don't want to blame my son for it, but I do find myself wanting to reach for more caffeine. I try to do it as early as possible, but I always in the back of my head, I'm just like, man, all the stuff that I've been telling other people to like try to avoid caffeine towards the end of the day, I am now that person that's like, man, I think I should probably just have one more just to finish out the day, and then tomorrow is going to be a different thing. But as far as caffeine use, I guess what's a good guide to follow, or like what are some pitfalls to avoid?
Let's comment on this. It's very interesting. So first of all, you're talking about using caffeine later in the day. Obviously, that's going to harm your sleep.
Yeah.
And, we should recommend that Walker, he has a great book on sleep. I'm sure you guys have maybe interviewed him also. But on this topic, so your adenosine receptors in response to caffeine in all studies downregulate, and they upregulate quickly when you take the caffeine out. So my feeling is if you're drinking it later in the day and still managing to sleep, you probably have downregulated adenosine receptors, and therefore the caffeine is less potent for you also. But on that note, I have a video on caffeine. If someone search caffeine, Leo on longevity, they'll get the video. I also have one on coffee separately, but the one on caffeine is interesting. So the empirical evidence shows that up to 600, if I recall correctly, to 800 milligrams of caffeine a day is associated with better health. both cardiovascular health and mental health. I've reviewed the studies in that video, and all the studies are put into the screen. So I was really surprised by this myself. It seems that caffeine has a good effect on brain function, despite not just coffee, but caffeine, and that it's not as bad for our cardiovascular health as we would think. Now, you would think if it's so bad for sleep, it should show negative effects on overall health, but it doesn't at those doses.
600 to 800 milligrams.
Which is a lot if you think about it. That's way more than I drink.
I'll feel like a normal person at that at that amount.
So, quick question: 600 to 800 milligrams. You see a benefit for cardiovascular health. You don't see any detriments lower than 600 milligrams, correct? It's not like there's a yeah.
No, the detriment is above 800. At that point, there comes issues with cardiovascular health. It's if I remember the cups, it's up to like 5 cups of coffee a day, something like that. And it's that it doesn't damage cardiovascular health and has so many different beneficial effects on mental health and all the other things like that.
Got it.
I haven't reviewed the video for a while, but it was surprising to me because I thought that the major effects of caffeine on health came from the polyphenols in coffee, which are very potent, But it turns out caffeine itself is also maybe helpful, or at least not harmful.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, Leo and Longevity on YouTube. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure to talk to you guys. See you later.
See ya.
Hell yeah.
Wow. There was a lot in that.
Kind of all downhill after the penis.
Yeah, I was
talk.
gonna say that's all I could think about. I pulled it up on Amazon and it is on there.
How many penis pumps and hanger things?
Let's
are
go to his
sell?
website.
Yeah,
because he has
I'll
the
make
right
sure.
ones there. Because I'm gonna check it out. I value mobility. I value flexibility of all joints, all tendons.
Yeah, while you're stretching your hamstrings, you're stretching
Stretch my
your
dick.
wang too.
Yeah.
Right? Why not?
Yeah.
Zach.
And it uses the physics of resistance to grow that tendon.
Right? Doug McNolly should have a section of this in his book. He should. Physics of resistance exercise. Yeah, Zick.
Maybe we can be affiliates for the pump.
Hey.
And the what was the other thing? Hanger?
Bib hanger.
hanger.
Bib hanger.
I gotta pretend I don't know about it. Like I don't.
Yeah.
Y'all about to see me fucking limping around the office. And Nsima, what happened? Nothing.
Good workout. That was a good workout this morning.
Oh man.
Okay, I get what he means by hanging. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Ball necrosis though.
Yeah, that's scary.
That shit, that is a bite. That is a little,
The whole thing
that's
is
wild, man.
Yeah, fuck. There's so much good stuff today.
There's nothing wrong with steroids. I don't take any, but there's nothing wrong with them. But y'all just gotta be careful, yo.
Yeah.
Like you cats gotta be careful because all the shit he knows. A majority of y'all don't even know that much. Not even close.
Yep.
So do your fucking research so you don't fucking hurt yourself, please.
Yeah, it's good with any drug, any substance you're going to use. Just learn about it.
Well, and then when
ask around, ask a bunch of people, find out as much information as you can.
Yeah, and then when he was saying take a big dose of kratom and then go get some blood work done, I'm just like, man, like no one's gonna do that, like. And I'm not saying like his information wasn't correct or it wasn't good advice. It's just, what we're talking about here. It's like, man, people want to do all these things, but they don't want to take the extra step to make sure that they're okay. And then when he was talking about getting your heart scanned or imaging done, just like, damn, like, yeah, there's so much more to just figuring out the proper dosage and, proper compound and all this stuff. It's really, really complex.
I think a part of the reason why some people don't, and even when I was getting my blood work done from Merrick, I was a little anxious because I was like, I hope nothing comes back negative. I hope I'm okay, right? Because like I have nothing necessarily to be worried about, but at the same time, it's like, what if there is something wrong with my heart? What if there is something here, right? So especially for individuals who are on PEDs, and you've never gotten anything checked, I know there's probably anxiety there because you don't want to see something, but the thing is you have to make sure. You have to get your blood work done. You have to get these tests done because you need to make sure you're in good health so you don't knock out randomly at a young age.
Just a little comment on that is, first of all, good job on anybody that does go and get their blood work done. So you should be kind of proud of yourself that you went and did that, but just be accepting of whatever comes back, and be prepped, be prepared that like, yeah, there could be some, but all it is information. and it's like, hey, your vitamin D is actually really low. Your cholesterol is way out of whack. Don't allow those things to move you off of what you wanted to do in the first place. And that was to figure out a way. I mean, you were checking on your health, right? Now you have information that your health was not as good as you thought it was. Mm-hmm. And now you have an opportunity to do something about it. So I actually have some friends that have gotten blood work back before, and they are so upset about a certain finding. And I'm like, I understand why you're upset, but at the same time, this is great because now we got new information. So now you can figure out a way to attack it. You didn't know this before. You didn't know that this may be kind of the root cause of some of the symptoms that you've had or some of the issues that you've been having lately. And so now we found it. Now we can figure out a way to attack it.